Today is a grim milestone. The horror that started after the Hamas's terror attack on Israel began a cycle of violence. Israeli jets have relentlessly bombarded Gaza. Hamas-controlled Gazan authorities say that over 41,800 people have died in the last 12 months. Well, Israel has used almost every weapon in its arsenal to destroy Hamas, but the group still remains a fighting force. Gaza is now reduced to a heap of rubble. The special report explores the question on the lips of every surviving Gazans. When will this carnage end? Our next report tries to answer that very question. Take a look.
The once bustling streets of the Gaza Strip have been transformed into an eerie landscape of dusty craters, twisted wires, and crumpled buildings. After a year of Israeli bombardment following Hamas's October 7th attacks, the densely populated enclave, with a pre-war population of 2.3 million, has been pulverized. Here, in the southern city of Khan Yunis, more than 19,000 buildings have been damaged, data from the UN satellite center UNOSAT shows. It is the second worst affected area. The first is northern Gaza. Jihad Shamli, who lost a child in March, has been displaced 4 times since Israel's offensive began. Hamas attacked Israeli communities on October 7th, killing around 1,200 people and taking around 250 hostages, according to Israeli tallies. Israel says Hamas hides fighters among the general population in Gaza. The militant group denies this. Israel says it will strike Hamas wherever they emerge, while trying to reduce harm to civilians. Palestinian health authorities say more than 41,700 people have been killed since the start of Israel's military campaign. UNOSAT shows 2/3 of Gaza's pre-war structures have been damaged as Israel tries to eliminate Hamas. That's a total of 163,778 structures. And the UN estimates that more than 42 million tons of debris are piled up in the Strip. That's over 14 times the rubble accumulated in all the conflicts in Gaza since 2008, and enough to fill the Great Pyramid of Giza 11 times. The United Nations Environment Program, or UNEP, estimates that 2.3 million tons of the debris generated in this conflict could be contaminated with asbestos. It is mainly found in the older buildings and structures of Gaza's 8 crowded refugee camps, some of which have been hit. With prolonged exposure, the asbestos fibers are inhaled and over time can cause diseases, including lung, larynx, and ovarian cancers, and fibrosis of the lungs, according to the World Health Organization. Experts say asbestos-related diseases usually take 10 to 50 years to emerge. The path ahead is also littered with practical difficulties. UN experts say Gaza lacks the 1,300 acres of land needed to store all the rubble. And landfills are now in an Israeli military zone. Israel's military unit Kogat says they were in a restricted area, but access would be granted. Government officials report fuel and machinery shortages as Israeli restrictions slow clear-up efforts. Israel did not specifically comment on these allegations. The UNEP says it will need owners' permission to remove rubble, but the scale of the destruction has blurred property boundaries, and some property records have been lost in the war. Asked about the debris, Kogat said it aims to improve waste handling and will work with the United Nations to expand efforts. Several donors have expressed interest in rebuilding Gaza. But a UN official who asked to remain anonymous told Reuters that, quote, everyone is concerned whether to invest if there is no political solution in place.
For more on this, we're now being joined by Dr. Alan Bostein, live from Boston. He's a professor of political science and Israel Institute fellow at Tufts University. Welcome to WION. Alan. Now, it has been 1 year since Hamas attacked Israel, leading to the subsequent war. As of now, Israel has vowed to retaliate against Iran, and its ground incursion into Lebanon continues. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has said that Israel faces war on 7 fronts. First up, how do you see the war, which started between Israel and Hamas, potentially escalating into a broader war across the entire West Asia?
Thank you for having me, and good morning. That was essentially Hamas's vision. Already on October 7th last year, Hamas called upon all the forces that they considered part of their axis to join forces and all attack Israel together. It expected Hezbollah to throw its full weight into the war, Iran, Syria, Palestinian uprising in the West Bank. It largely did not get what it wanted. Hezbollah threw very limited weight into the war. There was no massive Palestinian uprising in the West Bank. What has happened, though, is throughout the year, these smaller escalations that began on October 7th last year took on a life of its own. All of a sudden, at the end of July, Israel and Hezbollah started escalating their attacks at each other, regardless of what was happening in Gaza. That's now led to an Israeli invasion of Lebanon. The attacks between Israel and Iran back in April, the first time in history that Iran actually attacked Israel directly. Now they're attacking each other. The Houthis taking on its own dynamic. It didn't happen exactly the way Hamas wanted, but ultimately that was what they hoped would happen, the entire region engulfing Israel into a war, and possibly the resolution of the regional issue, helping them resolve what they want to resolve in Gaza as well.
Right, Alan, you do speak of Hamas did not achieve what it wanted when the war started on October 7th last year. I want to seek your perspective if you think that Israel has been able to achieve its war goals 1 year later, or do you think that Israel has changed its war goals since the start of the war? Because earlier it wanted to eliminate Hamas, but now it also wants to return the residents to the north of the country.
So Israel certainly has not achieved its goals. Israel's changed its goals a couple of times in rhetoric and also officially, like you said. In rhetoric, the goals initially were to restore the hostages, bring the hostages home, and destroy Hamas. And then there was a debate in Israel, are those two goals aligned? Is one more important than the other if you can bring back more hostages but leave Hamas alive or not? Either way, Hamas is certainly not destroyed. Even in the northern parts of the Gaza Strip, which the IDF finished taking over already in December of 2023, yesterday rockets were fired from the northern parts of the Gaza Strip. The IDF's carrying out another mission there. The hostages certainly are not all home. On that front, Israel's not achieved its goals. Then, a month ago, it added, like you said, the goal of allowing the 80,000 Israeli residents that have been evacuated from the northern parts of Israel to return home. All we are seeing right now is a further escalation in the situation up north. So Israel can claim a lot of victories in weakening Hamas, in killing a lot of its operatives, in certainly curtailing its governing activities. However, success in the goals, neither one of the sides can claim that a year in.
Dr. Burstein, my last question to you. As a war rages in West Asia, as Israel marks the first anniversary of Hamas attack, what the region is anticipating is Israel's retaliation to the Iranian missile attack last week. As of now, the CENTCOM chief is in Israel, mulling Israel's retaliation against Iran. But I want to ask you, how much influence does U.S. have on Israel at this point of time? And if you can also shed some light on U.S.'s role in the war in West Asia.
So the U.S. has a hell of a lot of influence on the way Israel carries out its activities, not on every tactical action, but on the macro, because the United States, for example, cannot or probably would not be able to stop Israel from retaliating against Iran. But the United States can tell Israel, look, if you retaliate specifically against, for example, oil rigs, nuclear facilities, maybe things the United States does not want you to retaliate against, we may not offer you, for example, diplomatic protection in the United Nations. The United States not only gives major aid packages to Israel and weaponry to Israel, it gives it the diplomatic lifeline that Israel needs. Without the veto power of the United States, Israel would be probably the most ostracized nation, may even be kicked out of the United Nations. So the United States has a lot of influence in that sense. However, it's also important to remember we are less than a month away from the U.S. elections, and that plays a role in both sides. In Israel knows that the United States is going to try to, on the one hand, make sure that things don't flare up. On the other hand, also needs to appear completely supportive of Israel. The Biden administration, the Democrats do not want to appear that they're not supporting Israel in the war. It all feeds in together. The United States has played a role throughout the war. They are largely the ones that are responsible for the fact that Hezbollah did not join the war fully on October 8th. The United States sent aircraft carriers in. They've also curtailed the Houthis to a large extent. They have been a very supportive role in Israel also in intercepting the missiles from Iran. In that sense, they're not a lead actor in the war, but they play a critical role in making sure that Israel has what it needs in order to carry on its war effort. And from that perspective, they do have a lot of influence on how Israel operates.
Right. Thank you, Dr. Burstein, for joining us and WION with your insights.
Thank you. Have a good day.
You too.